Part 1. The Mysterious Ship. It was a foggy evening when Mia and Layla arrived at the harbor. The salt air stung their faces, and the eerie silence hung heavily in the air. The ship before them, the Tempest, looked like something out of a nightmare. Dark, weathered, and anchored in a forgotten part of the dock, it seemed as if it had been abandoned for decades. No lights flickered from its windows, and its once proud sails now hung in tatters. The wooden deck was covered in a thick layer of moss, and the ship groaned under its own weight, as though it were alive. Mia glanced at Layla, who hesitated at the edge of the dock. "Are you sure about this?" Layla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the weight of the stories that had haunted the town for years, the tales of strange disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and a ship that never seemed to leave. Mia, her curiosity overpowering any doubt, gave a quick nod. "We came here to explore, right? There's nothing to be afraid of." Despite her words, a creeping unease washed over her. The fog thickened around them, swallowing the dock as they stepped onto the ship's rotting planks. Every creak of the wood underfoot sounded unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. They moved deeper into the ship, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The air was damp and cold, and the only sound was the faint hiss of wind through broken windows. But then, a whisper. At first, it was too soft to make out. Layla froze, glancing around. Mia heard it too, a voice, low and indistinct, coming from somewhere inside the ship. "Did you hear that?" Layla asked, her voice trembling. Mia, trying to brush it off, shook her head. "It's nothing, just the wind." But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Something was watching them. Part 2. The Whispering Walls. The further Mia and Layla ventured into the ship, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The hallway stretched before them like a maze, dark and claustrophobic. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, as if the ship had been abandoned for centuries. Layla shivered, wrapping her arms around herself, but Mia pressed forward, her curiosity outweighing her discomfort. "Let's check the captain's quarters," Mia suggested, her voice echoing strangely in the silence. "If we're going to uncover anything, that's where we'll find it." Layla nodded hesitantly, but the further they moved, the more uneasy she became. She could swear the temperature was dropping. Her breath was visible in the air, though it was still warm outside. Every step they took seemed amplified by the ship's creaks and groans, but it was the whispers that unsettled her most. At first, Layla thought she was imagining it, a faint murmur, too quiet to make out. But then it came again, louder this time, curling through the walls like a serpent. "Did you hear that?" Layla asked, her voice shaky. She stopped, her eyes darting to the walls. Mia nodded, her brow furrowing. "It's just the ship. Old wood creaks, the wind." But the whispers grew more distinct, each word clearer, yet still indecipherable. They seemed to come from all directions, closing in on them. Layla pressed her back to the wall, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The ship felt alive, as if it were breathing, listening. "Stop," Layla gasped, grabbing Mia's arm. "Something's wrong." Before Mia could respond, the whispers stopped. An eerie, deafening silence followed, and for a moment, everything felt still. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind slammed the door in front of them, causing it to rattle violently. Both girls screamed, eyes wide in terror. As the door creaked open slowly, they saw something that froze them in place. On the other side, an old, leather-bound book lay open on the captain's desk. It was waiting for them. Part 3. The Captain's Diary. Mia's fingers trembled as she reached for the book, its leather cover cracked and worn with age. The moment she touched it, an icy chill ran through her veins, and the whispers from earlier seemed to echo in her mind, growing louder, urgent. Layla stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear, but she couldn't look away. The book beckoned them. Mia opened the diary, her heart pounding. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. As she flipped through the brittle pages, the entries grew darker. The captain's handwriting was frantic, and with each new page, it became more desperate. "The crew is losing their minds. Voices everywhere. Shadows in the water. We are not alone. Asterisk." Mia swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the words pressing down on her chest. The entries continued, describing how the crew had heard voices coming from the depths of the sea at night, whispers in languages they couldn't understand. Then came the disappearances. The crew had started vanishing one by one, leaving behind only strange symbols scratched into the ship's walls. They told me the ship is cursed. If we don't appease them, we will all perish. Asterisk. Layla's breath caught in her throat. Who are they? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Mia turned the page, her fingers shaking. The last entry sent a shiver through her body. It's too late. The spirits are awake. I've seen their faces, hollow, lifeless, hungry. The ship demands a sacrifice. We are trapped, and I fear we will never escape. Asterisk. Suddenly, the room grew colder. Mia looked up, and her blood ran cold. The door they had entered through slammed shut behind them. The whispers returned, louder this time, and they weren't coming from the walls, they were coming from the shadows themselves. Before they could react, the room was plunged into darkness. A cold hand brushed Mia's shoulder, and she spun around. Nothing. But the whispers. They were closer now, and they knew their names. Part 4. The ghostly figure. Mia's heart raced as the room darkened, the whispers now a chorus of voices, each more frantic than the last. Layla's breathing was shallow, her eyes wide with terror, but Mia couldn't move. Every instinct told her to run, yet something kept her rooted to the spot. Then, through the thickening darkness, a figure emerged. At first, it was only a shadow, a vague outline, but it solidified slowly, like fog coming into shape. A man, tall and gaunt, his clothes tattered, his face pale and twisted. His eyes were hollow, sunken deep into his skull. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Yet, somehow, Mia could feel his voice, cold, malevolent, reaching into her soul. The figure stepped forward, and Mia froze. It was him, the captain, the man from the diary. Who are you? Layla whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. His lips moved, but it was as if his words were swallowed by the ship itself. The whispers grew louder, filling the air around them. Mia wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. Every breath was a struggle against the suffocating fear that clung to the room. Suddenly, the ship groaned violently, the wood creaking as if the entire vessel was shifting. The captain's ghost began to move closer, his hands outstretched, but his eyes never left theirs. It was then that Mia saw something that made her blood run cold. The captain's eyes, once hollow, were now filled with dark, swirling shadows. And those shadows were watching them. Get out, a voice finally broke the silence, an unnerving hiss. But it wasn't the captain. It was coming from somewhere else. Somewhere deeper. Mia turned to Layla, but when she looked back, the captain's figure had disappeared, leaving behind only a cold, empty room. The whispers didn't stop. They were growing louder. And now, they were saying her name. Part 5. Trapped. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, and the room seemed to close in on them. Mia and Layla exchanged a frantic glance, their breaths shallow and ragged. The whispers were no longer coming from the walls, they were inside their heads, twisting, turning, growing louder with each passing second. We have to get out, now. Layla cried, her voice breaking as she rushed toward the door. But it wouldn't open. She pulled and yanked at the handle with all her strength, but the door was sealed shut, as though the ship itself had locked them in. Mia backed away from the door, heart hammering in her chest. The air was growing colder, heavier, suffocating. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady herself. It's no use. It's like the ship, it doesn't want us to leave. The ship groaned, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the very bowels of the vessel. The floor beneath their feet shifted, tilting at a strange angle. They stumbled, their bodies fighting to stay upright as the ship seemed to come alive around them. The whispers intensified, no longer just words but frantic screams, distant and yet so close. The walls seemed to pulse, like the heart of a beast awakening. And then, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the corridor. Someone, or something, was approaching. Mia's pulse quickened as she turned to Layla, but before either of them could react, the door they had tried to escape through opened. A cold breeze rushed in, carrying with it the scent of saltwater and decay. The figure in the doorway appeared again, the captain. But this time, he was different. His eyes were no longer hollow. They burned with an unnatural fire. He stepped forward, and the shadows around him twisted, stretching toward Mia and Layla. "Leave," the captain growled, his voice raspy and full of malice. "Before it's too late." But something in his gaze told them it already was. Part 6. The Sailor's Curse. The captain's hollow gaze pierced through the darkness, his eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. Mia and Layla stood frozen, the air around them thick with dread. The door was wide open now, yet they couldn't move. The ship seemed to hum with a low, vibrating energy, as though it was alive and waiting. "Leave, before it's too late," the captain's voice rasped again, but his words were more than a warning, they were a command. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating, as if the very walls of the ship had become an extension of him, closing them in. Layla, her body trembling, reached for Mia's hand. "We need to go," she whispered, but Mia was staring at the captain, her eyes locked on his face. There was something wrong, something terrifyingly wrong. As the captain took another step forward, the floor beneath them groaned, and the walls seemed to shift, warping as if the ship itself was breathing. Mia's mind raced. The ship wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. The captain wasn't just a ghost, he was part of the curse, a guardian of something darker, something that had been waiting for them. "Who are you?" Mia found her voice, though it barely rose above a whisper. "What do you want from us?" The captain's face contorted into a twisted grin. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, Mia saw something terrifying, a glimpse of the ship's past. He was not just a sailor, he was its first victim, the one who had unwittingly awoken the curse, binding himself to the ship forever. "The ship demands a sacrifice," the captain murmured, stepping closer. "You're already part of it, the moment you stepped aboard." Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, as though it had been struck by a massive wave. Mia and Layla were thrown to the ground, their heads spinning. The captain's form flickered like a mirage, then vanished into thin air, leaving them alone in the shifting darkness. But as the ship groaned and tilted, the whispers returned, louder, more frantic. It was clear now, the ship wasn't letting them leave. Not yet. Part 7. The Final Escape. Mia's breath caught in her throat as the ship tilted again, violently this time, throwing her and Layla off balance. The wooden floor beneath their feet groaned like the low growl of a beast waking from slumber. The walls seemed to close in on them, their surroundings warping and stretching as if the ship itself was alive, trying to swallow them whole. "Run!" Layla screamed, grabbing Mia's arm. But before they could move, a deep, unsettling laugh echoed through the corridors, a low, guttural sound that sent chills through their bones. It wasn't the captain. The voice was unfamiliar, but it carried the same dark, malevolent energy that had haunted the ship since they boarded. It came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the very timbers of the ship. The whispers grew into frantic screams. "Leave now, before it's too late. It's coming for you. You will never escape." Asterisk. The air turned freezing cold, and every breath felt like ice. Mia's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to move, pulling Layla toward the deck. The ship groaned and moaned like a dying animal, and the sky outside was pitch black, the moon hidden by clouds. But something wasn't right. The water around the ship wasn't moving, it was unnervingly still, reflecting the ship's decaying form like a mirror. They reached the deck, only to be met by an impossible sight. The lifeboats were gone. No ropes, no boats, just the empty, rotting space where they had once been. What's happening?" Layla gasped, her eyes wild with panic. Mia turned, looking around for any sign of an escape, but there was nothing. The ship was sinking, slowly, agonizingly, yet it wasn't moving. It was stuck. And then, from the darkness, came a figure. The captain. His hollow eyes locked onto theirs as the ship began to sink deeper into the water, yet he remained standing, unbothered by the chaos. His lips parted. "It's too late," he whispered, the ship's walls shaking with his words. "You'll never leave." Mia and Layla turned to run, but the ship was already pulling them down into the abyss. The water rose quickly around them, and the last thing they saw before they were submerged was the captain, his eyes glowing in the deep, smiling as the darkness swallowed them whole. Part 8. The Unfinished Curse. Mia's eyes snapped open. She was gasping for air, her body drenched in cold sweat. She sat up, heart racing, her mind disoriented. She was lying on the shore, the salty air still heavy in her lungs. The sounds of the crashing waves echoed in the distance, but the ship, the cursed ship, was nowhere in sight. Layla, Mia called out, her voice cracking with panic. She looked around, but there was no sign of her friend. The beach was deserted. Only the sound of the ocean filled the silence, far too peaceful for what they had just experienced. Mia's pulse quickened as she scrambled to her feet. Where was Layla? Had they somehow escaped? She staggered forward, searching the shore, calling out for her friend. Layla, she shouted, her voice echoing in the empty air. But there was no response. Only the wind and the rolling tide. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, sitting on a bench near the harbor, staring out at the ocean. Mia's heart stopped. It was him, the captain. His eyes, hollow and dark, never left her. What? How are you? Mia gasped, taking a step back. Her mind reeled, trying to process what she was seeing. The captain turned toward her slowly, his lips curling into a cruel smile. You think you escaped? He asked, his voice low and cold. Mia's stomach twisted. Something was horribly wrong. She could feel the weight of his gaze, like an invisible chain pulling her toward him. Before she could react, the captain stood and pointed toward the sea. Mia's heart stopped as she looked out over the water. There it was. The Tempest, still there, its dark sails now visible on the horizon, drifting toward them. You're never truly free, the captain whispered, his voice trailing off as he disappeared into the wind. Mia turned to run, but when she looked back, the ship was closer, looming on the edge of the water. The curse had followed them. And Mia knew, the Tempest would never let them go. As the darkness closes in, our journey tonight comes to an end, but the shadows still whisper their secrets, and some stories are better left untold, or are they? If you've made it this far, you've felt the chill of the unknown, and remember, this won't be our last meeting. The night is never truly silent, and there's always something lurking, watching, waiting. Until we cross paths again, stay vigilant, and sleep tight, if you can. If you enjoy this story, so please subscribe my channel and set bell icon on all. Also share my video to others and like my video as an appreciation. Thanks.